The prison that held hope. The last human in chains. Commander Jackson Hayes had been in the Borith maximum security prison for exactly 317 days when they brought in the alien child. The prison floated in dead space between star systems, a facility designed to hold the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, war criminals, terrorists, those who had violated the sacred treaty of non-interference that governed all spacefaring species. Jackson was the only human imprisoned there. His crime was simple and unforgivable: he had broken the treaty. The punishment was life imprisonment with no chance of appeal, no possibility of parole, no hope of redemption. The galaxy had spoken, and humanity had not defended him. Earth's government had publicly condemned his actions, desperate to maintain their fragile position in the galactic community. The child they brought in was small, maybe 4 feet tall, with silver skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her species was unknown to Jackson, but her eyes, large and luminous, held a terror that transcended species boundaries. The guards, hulking Borith enforcers in powered armor, shoved her roughly into the communal holding area where Jackson and 40 other prisoners waited for their daily processing. The crime that changed everything. Jackson watched as the guards removed her restraints and left without a word. The child stood frozen, trembling, while the other prisoners assessed her with predatory calculation. In facilities like this, the weak became currency, traded, exploited, broken for entertainment or profit. The guards allowed it because it made their jobs easier. The child's eyes found Jackson's, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or just desperate hope that someone, anyone, might help her. She took a tentative step toward him, and Jackson felt every eye in the room shift to watch his response. He knew what helping her would cost. In prison hierarchy, humans were already at the bottom, seen as weak, emotional, easily manipulated. If he protected this child, he would become a target. The other prisoners would view it as a challenge to be met, a weakness to be exploited. His already difficult existence would become unbearable. Jackson made his decision in less than a second. He stood up from the corner where he had been sitting and walked toward the child, positioning himself between her and the rest of the room. "She's with me," he said in galactic common, his voice carrying across the space. "Anyone who touches her deals with me first." A ripple of laughter ran through the prisoners. A massive Krell convict, his scaled body covered in scars from 100 fights, stepped forward. "The human thinks he can protect anything. Perhaps we should teach him otherwise." The fight nobody expected. Jackson had been a soldier before he was a prisoner, a decorated Special Forces operative who had served humanity for 20 years. He was 43 years old, past his physical prime by human standards, and facing a being that outweighed him by at least 100 pounds and possessed natural armor that could deflect most weapons. The Krell attacked fast, faster than something his size should have been able to move. But Jackson was faster. He sidestepped the charge, used the alien's momentum against him, and delivered a precise strike to a nerve cluster at the base of the Krell's skull, a vulnerable point Jackson had learned during his military career studying alien anatomy. The Krell went down hard, unconscious before he hit the floor. The room went silent. "Anyone else?" Jackson asked calmly, though his heart was pounding and his hand throbbed from the strike. He had just used up his one surprise advantage. If they came at him together, he would lose. He would be beaten, possibly killed, and the child would be left unprotected. But prison politics were complex. By defeating the Krell, Jackson had demonstrated capability. He had earned a temporary reprieve, not respect, exactly, but wary acknowledgement that he was more dangerous than he appeared. The other prisoners backed down, returning to their own concerns, though Jackson knew this was far from over. He turned to the child, who was staring at him with wide, amazed eyes. "Do you understand galactic common?" he asked gently. She nodded, her small voice barely a whisper. "Yes. My name is Sarah. I am from the Lightkeeper colony in the Andromeda sector. I was taken. Stolen. And when I tried to escape, they said I had broken treaty laws. They said I had interfered with authorized traitors." Her voice broke. But they were slavers. They took children from my colony. I was just trying to go home. Jackson felt cold rage settle in his stomach. The Treaty of Non-Interference was supposed to protect developing species from exploitation. But like all laws, it could be twisted by those with power and resources. If the slavers had the right permits, the right documentation, they could claim their actions were legal. And anyone who interfered, even the victims trying to escape, could be prosecuted. The story behind the bars. "How old are you, Sarah?" Jackson asked, kneeling down to her eye level. 14 solar cycles. In my species, that is still childhood. We do not reach maturity until 20 cycles. She looked at him with those luminous eyes. "Why did you help me?" "The guards told me humans are weak. That you are all cowards who care only for yourselves." Jackson smiled grimly. The guards were wrong. Humans have a lot of faults, but cowardice isn't usually one of them. We tend to be stubborn about helping people who need it, even when we shouldn't. "Is that why you are here? Because you helped someone?" "In a way." Jackson stood, scanning the room to make sure no one was approaching. 3 years ago, I was part of a sanctioned military operation. We were supposed to observe a conflict between two pre-warp species and report back. No interference, no matter what we witnessed. That was the treaty requirement. He paused, the memory still painful. But one side was committing genocide. They were systematically murdering civilians, children, elderly, anyone who couldn't fight back. We had the power to stop it. Our ship's weapons could have taken out their military installations in hours. We could have saved millions of lives. The choice that condemned him. "But the treaty forbids interference," Sarah said quietly. "Even to prevent atrocity." "Yes. My commanding officer wanted to follow protocol. Report the situation and let the Galactic Council decide how to respond. But I knew how long that would take, months, maybe years of debate and committee meetings. By then, millions would be dead. So I took matters into my own hands." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I locked my CO in his quarters, took control of the ship, and intervened. We destroyed military targets, disabled their capacity to continue the genocide. We saved approximately 6 million lives according to the final estimates." "Then you are a hero," Sarah said with conviction. "Not according to the galaxy. I broke the treaty. I interfered with the natural development of a pre-warp species. It doesn't matter that I saved lives, what matters is that I violated the most fundamental law of galactic civilization. I was court-martialed, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment. My own species disavowed me to avoid political consequences." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "The galaxy is not fair." "No," Jackson agreed. "It's not. But fairness and justice aren't the same thing. I broke the law, and I knew the consequences. I'd do it again. The plan nobody saw coming." Over the next few weeks, Jackson and Sarah developed a routine. He taught her how to navigate prison politics, how to avoid trouble, how to fight if necessary. She was a quick learner, her mind sharp despite her trauma. In return, she told him about her people, the Lightkeepers, a species that could manipulate photons, creating light displays of stunning beauty. "Our entire culture revolves around light," she explained one evening. "We communicate through bioluminescence, we create art with photon manipulation, we even heal using specific light frequencies. But the slavers, they wanted us because wealthy collectors pay fortunes for beings who can create beautiful things on command. We were going to be living decorations, pets for the rich." Jackson's hands clenched into fists. "How many children did they take?" 37 from my colony alone. I was in the first group they transported. I do not know where the others were taken." "We're going to find them," Jackson said with quiet determination. Sarah looked at him in confusion. "But we are prisoners. We cannot leave this facility. Even if we could, you are one human and I am one child. How could we possibly?" Because I spent 20 years learning how to do impossible things, Jackson interrupted. And because the galaxy made a mistake when they put me in here. They thought they were removing a problem. What they actually did was create someone with nothing left to lose, nothing left to fear, and a really good reason to be angry. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've been watching this prison for almost a year now. I know its patterns, its weaknesses, its security protocols. I know which guards are corrupt, which systems are outdated, and which regulations they ignore because following them is inconvenient. The impossible begins. You are planning an escape, Sarah breathed. I'm planning something much bigger than that, Jackson corrected. An escape would just save us. What I'm planning will tear down the entire rotten system that put innocent children in prison and let slavers operate with impunity. Sarah's bioluminescence flickered with excitement and fear. But the treaty? The treaty is broken, Jackson said flatly. It was designed to prevent powerful species from exploiting weaker ones. But it's been corrupted into a tool that protects the powerful and punishes the victims. Someone needs to challenge it. Someone needs to prove that the galaxy's most sacred law is fundamentally unjust. And you believe one human can do this? Jackson smiled, a dangerous expression that made Sarah's silver skin ripple with sympathetic tension. No. I believe one human can start it. Humans have a saying, be the change you want to see. Well, I'm done waiting for the galaxy to change. I'm going to force it to change. Over the next month, Jackson began implementing his plan. He was careful, methodical, using every skill he had learned in 2 decades of military service. He cultivated relationships with corrupt guards, offering information about other prisoners in exchange for small favors. He observed the prison's security systems, noting their cycles and vulnerabilities. He gathered allies among the prisoner population, not friends, exactly, but beings who would cooperate for their own benefit. And he taught Sarah everything he knew. Combat techniques adapted for her smaller frame and different physiology. Tactical thinking and strategic planning. How to read people, how to spot deception, how to exploit weakness. She absorbed it all like a sponge, her sharp mind turning lessons into instinctive understanding. Why are you teaching me all this? She asked one day during a training session where Jackson was showing her pressure points on various species' anatomies. Because I might not survive what's coming, Jackson said honestly. Because you need to be able to protect yourself. And because someone needs to carry forward the idea that justice matters more than law, that doing the right thing matters more than following rules. Sarah's luminescence dimmed with sadness. I do not want you to die. Neither do I, Jackson assured her. I plan to live a long time and cause a lot of trouble for people who deserve it. But if something happens to me, I need to know that you can survive. That you can continue the fight. The truth nobody wanted. 3 months after Sarah's arrival, Jackson finally put his plan into motion. He had learned that the prison's warden, a Vorath official named Krelvar, was involved in the slave trade that had taken Sarah and her companions. The warden used his position to identify vulnerable prisoners, then arranged for them to disappear from the system, sold to buyers who wanted exotic specimens. Jackson had documented everything: guard rotations, financial transfers, communications between Krelvar and known slavers. He had built a case that would destroy the warden and expose the corruption that allowed such operations to thrive. But evidence alone wasn't enough. He needed to escape the prison, get the information to someone who would act on it, and rescue the stolen children before they were scattered across the galaxy. The opportunity came during a prisoner transfer. New inmates were arriving, and the security protocols were temporarily relaxed to process them. Jackson had bribed a guard to include him in the transfer group, ostensibly being moved to a different cell block. Sarah was hidden in a maintenance cart, a space barely large enough for her small frame. As they moved through the prison's corridors, Jackson's plan unfolded. The bribed guard accidentally left a door unsealed. Jackson overpowered his escorts, 2 guards who had been chosen because Jackson knew they were lazy and undertrained. He freed Sarah from the cart, and together they moved through the prison's maintenance tunnels, following a route Jackson had memorized. Alarms began to sound. The escape had been discovered faster than Jackson had hoped. They had minutes, maybe, before the entire facility went into lockdown. They ran through the tunnels, Sarah's smaller size actually an advantage in the cramped spaces. They reached the hangar bay where confiscated ships were stored. Jackson's own vessel, a military-grade transport he had stolen during his original crime, sat in the corner like a forgotten relic. He had gambled that the prison wouldn't have sold it yet. Military vessels were valuable, but they also came with tracking systems and security protocols that made them difficult to resell. "Get in!" Jackson shouted as plasma fire erupted behind them. Guards had entered the hangar, their weapons trained on the escaping prisoners. Jackson returned fire with a weapon he had stolen from an escort, buying Sarah time to reach the ship. She made it to the boarding ramp. Jackson was 3 steps behind when something hit him, a plasma bolt, not lethal but devastating. He went down hard, his leg burning with agony, his weapon clattering across the hangar floor, the choice that changed a galaxy. The student becomes the hero. Sarah saw Jackson fall and every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape while she had the chance. She had the ship, the evidence, the means to complete their mission. It was what Jackson had trained her for, to survive, to continue the fight even if he couldn't. But she had also learned something else from him, something he had never explicitly taught but had demonstrated every day, that you don't abandon people who need you, even when survival demands it. She ran back down the boarding ramp, her small form moving with the speed that only terror and determination could provide. The guards were closing in, their weapons charging for another volley. Sarah did something she had never done before, never even known she could do. She focused every bit of her photon manipulation ability into a single, blinding flash of light that filled the entire hangar like a miniature star-going nova. The guards screamed, their optical sensors overloading, their biological eyes seared by the intensity. Sarah dragged Jackson's larger body toward the ship with strength born of desperation, her muscles burning with the effort. She got him to the ramp, pulled him inside, and somehow, she would never quite remember how, got him strapped into the co-pilot's seat while she took the pilot's position. The flight nobody believed possible. Sarah had watched Jackson fly the ship dozens of times during their months together, studying his movements, asking questions about every system. But watching and doing were different things. Her hands trembled as she initiated the startup sequence, praying she remembered the correct order. The ship's engines roared to life. The hangar bay doors were closing, massive blast shields designed to prevent exactly this kind of escape. Sarah pushed the throttle forward, the ship lurching into motion with none of Jackson's smooth control. They accelerated toward the narrowing gap, alarms shrieking from every console. "Come on," Sarah whispered, her luminescence flashing with stress. "Come on, come on, come on." They shot through the gap with centimeters to spare, the ship's hull scraping against the closing doors with a scream of tortured metal. Then they were in open space, the prison facility falling away behind them. Pursuit ships would launch in seconds. Sarah's hands flew across the navigation controls, inputting the hyperspace coordinates Jackson had made her memorize. The wound that revealed everything. "Sarah," Jackson's voice was weak, pained. "You came back for me." "Of course I did," she said, not taking her eyes off the controls as she prepared for the jump to hyperspace. "Did you think I would leave you?" "I hoped you would. I trained you to survive, to complete the mission even if," he groaned as pain lanced through his injured leg. "You should have left me." "You broke the treaty to save 6 million people you never met," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "Did you really think I would abandon the person who saved me? Who taught me I had value beyond what others could use me for?" The hyperspace jump engaged, reality twisting around them as they leaped across light years in an instant. When normal space reasserted itself, they were in the outer reaches, far from any major trade routes or enforcement vessels. Sarah finally turned to look at Jackson. His face was pale with blood loss, his breathing shallow. The plasma wound on his leg was severe, the flesh burned and damaged in ways she didn't have the medical knowledge to treat. She remembered Jackson's medical training lessons, pulled out the emergency kit, and began working with hands that refused to stop shaking. The message that started a revolution. While Jackson rested in the ship's small medical bay, sedated and healing, Sarah accessed the evidence files they had stolen from the prison. Hours of recordings, financial transactions, communications between Warden Krelvar and slavers across multiple sectors. It documented a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of galactic governance, showing how the Treaty of Non-Interference was being used as cover for exploitation and trafficking. But Sarah knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The galaxy's power structures protected themselves, buried scandals, silenced whistleblowers. She needed to do something that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be swept under the bureaucratic carpet. She spent 2 days preparing, working while Jackson recovered. She compiled the evidence into a comprehensive exposé, added her own testimony about the Lightkeeper children who had been taken, and created a presentation that was both professional and emotionally devastating. Then she did something unprecedented. She hacked into the Galactic Council's emergency broadcast system. During the Council's next public session, a formal ceremony attended by representatives from every member species and broadcast across civilized space, Sarah's presentation interrupted the proceedings. Every screen, every display, every communication device in council chambers and across the galaxy suddenly showed the evidence of systematic treaty violations by the very institutions meant to enforce it. The truth they couldn't hide. The galaxy watched as Sarah's small, luminous face appeared on screens everywhere. They heard her speak about children stolen from their homes, about being imprisoned for trying to escape slavery, about a human who had sacrificed everything to protect those the law had abandoned. "My name is Sarah of the Lightkeepers," she said in the recording, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am 14 cycles old. I am one of 37 children stolen from my colony by slavers operating under legal permits issued by your governments. When I tried to escape, I was imprisoned for violating the Treaty of Non-Interference. The human who protected me, Commander Jackson Hayes, saved 6 million lives and was condemned for it. This is your justice. This is your law." She showed them everything. The prison conditions, the corruption, the slaver networks operating with official sanction. She showed them Jackson's military records, his active intervention that saved millions, his conviction and imprisonment. She showed them proof that the treaty, the galaxy's most sacred law, had become a tool of oppression rather than protection. The galaxy's response. The response was immediate and explosive. Some species demanded Sarah's immediate capture and prosecution for the hack. Others called for investigations into the revealed corruption. Still others defended the treaty as necessary despite its flaws. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source: humanity. For 3 years, Earth's government had condemned Jackson Hayes, disavowed his actions, insisted that humanity accepted the treaty's authority completely. But now, faced with evidence of how the treaty was being abused, something shifted in human political consciousness. The public outcry was massive. Protests erupted on Earth and every human colony world. The message was clear: humanity would no longer accept a system that punished the moral and protected the corrupt. Within a week, Earth's government announced its withdrawal from the Treaty of Non-Interference unless major reforms were implemented. Within 2 weeks, 3 other species had joined the demand for change. Within a month, the Galactic Council was in crisis, its authority challenged in ways it had never experienced before. The rescue that proved a point. While the political firestorm raged, Jackson recovered enough to pilot again, and Sarah worked on what mattered most to them: rescuing the stolen Lightkeeper children. The evidence they had released included locations where the children had been sold. Many were in private collections, held by wealthy beings who viewed them as valuable property. Jackson and Sarah became an unlikely team of liberators, using his military training and her growing skills to infiltrate facilities and free imprisoned beings. They weren't subtle about it. Each rescue was documented and broadcast, showing the galaxy exactly what the treaty had enabled and protected. They freed the Lightkeeper children. Then they started freeing others, beings from dozens of species who had been caught in the same corrupt system, imprisoned or enslaved for trying to escape their exploitation. Each rescue added to their legend, made them harder to ignore. The galaxy called them criminals. Protesters called them heroes. The truth, as always, was more complicated. But what couldn't be denied was that their actions were forcing change that decades of proper procedures and legal channels had failed to achieve. The alliance nobody expected. 6 months after their escape from prison, Jackson and Sarah received a message from an unexpected source, the Krell convict that Jackson had fought in the prison. His name was Threx, and he had been released due to the prison's corruption scandal. His message was simple: he wanted to join their cause. "You showed me something, human," Threx's message said. "You showed me that strength isn't just physical power. You fought for someone who couldn't fight for themselves, even knowing you would suffer for it. My people value strength above all, but we have forgotten that true strength includes protecting the weak. I wish to learn this human way of strength." He wasn't the only one. Over the following months, beings from across the galaxy reached out: former prisoners, reformed criminals, idealists who believed the system could be better. Jackson and Sarah found themselves at the center of something larger than they had imagined, a movement dedicated to reforming how justice worked in galactic society. The trial that changed history. Eventually, inevitably, Jackson and Sarah were captured. Not through force, but through negotiation. The reformed Galactic Council, now under pressure from multiple species demanding change, offered a deal. Jackson would stand trial again, but this time in a public forum with representatives from every species, including humanity. The trial would address not just his actions, but the fundamental questions his case raised about the treaty itself. Jackson agreed, on one condition: Sarah would be allowed to testify on his behalf and would be granted full legal protections regardless of the trial's outcome. The trial lasted 3 months and was broadcast across the galaxy. Legal experts from every major species participated. Jackson didn't deny his actions. He had broken the treaty, had intervened in a pre-warp conflict. But he forced the council to confront why he had done it, to acknowledge that their sacred law sometimes demanded moral people commit immoral acts. Sarah's testimony was particularly powerful. She spoke about the children stolen with official permission, about being imprisoned for escaping slavery, about a system so focused on non-interference that it interfered with justice itself. Her youth, her obvious sincerity, and her intelligence made her impossible to dismiss as merely emotional or biased. The verdict that rewrote the law. The verdict, when it came, surprised everyone. Jackson was found guilty of violating the treaty. The evidence was undeniable. But the council acknowledged that the treaty itself required reform. They couldn't condone his actions without undermining all galactic law, but they could recognize that his actions had exposed fundamental flaws in how that law operated. Jackson's sentence was time served plus mandatory service as a consultant on the Treaty Reform Committee. He would help rewrite the very law he had broken, using his experience to create something better. It wasn't freedom, exactly, but it was acknowledgement that moral complexity existed even in clear-cut legal cases. More importantly, the treaty was reformed. New provisions were added allowing for intervention in cases of genocide, systematic abuse, and exploitation of vulnerable populations. Independent oversight committees were established to monitor enforcement. The presumption shifted from absolute non-interference to balanced consideration of both development rights and fundamental protections. The family nobody expected. 5 years after Jackson first protected a frightened child in a prison, he stood on the observation deck of a ship that had been gifted to him by the Reformed Council, compensation for wrongful imprisonment, though everyone understood it was really recognition of his role in forcing necessary change. Sarah stood beside him, now 19 and studying Xenolaw at the Galactic Institute. She planned to become an advocate for beings caught in legal systems that didn't understand them. Around them, the crew of their ship, a mix of humans and aliens, former prisoners and idealists, prepared for their next mission. They had become something unprecedented in galactic history, an independent intervention force, authorized to act in situations where the treaty's careful balance still failed vulnerable beings. They worked within the law now, but barely, always pushing its boundaries to protect those who fell through its cracks. Do you regret it? Sarah asked Jackson as they watched stars stream past. Everything you gave up to save me? Your career, your freedom, years of your life? Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Not for a second. You know why? Why? Because you came back for me. When you had every reason to leave, every justification to save yourself, you came back. That's the moment I knew that everything I had tried to teach you about human stubbornness and irrational compassion had taken root. That's when I knew that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could learn to be better. Sarah's luminescence brightened, filling the observation deck with soft light. The galaxy calls us treaty breakers. Let them, Jackson replied. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is break a bad rule. Sometimes justice requires defying law. That's what humans understood before we reached the stars, and it's what we're teaching the galaxy now, that rules serve people, not the other way around. The legacy that lives on. Years later, when historians studied the period known as the Treaty Reform era, they would point to Commander Jackson Hayes and Sarah of the Lightkeepers as the catalysts that changed galactic civilization. One human who chose compassion over comfort, and one child who learned that strength comes in many forms. But the real legacy wasn't in the laws that were changed or the systems that were reformed. It was in the idea they had proven, that one person, acting with courage and conviction, could challenge the entire galaxy's assumptions about justice, morality, and what truly mattered. The treaty still governed galactic civilization, but it was different now, better, more just, more aware of its own limitations. And when beings across the galaxy faced impossible choices between following law and doing right, many thought of the human who had chosen compassion and the child who had learned that choice from him. They called them treaty breakers. History called them heroes. But Jackson and Sarah thought of themselves as simply people who had refused to accept that cruelty was ever acceptable, even when law made it legal. And in a galaxy that had forgotten how to question its own rules, that refusal changed everything.